Have you ever found yourself in a situation where a poignant true story deeply affected you? Your heart races, and you can't help but feel emotionally invested in the narrative, as if you were personally involved. The physical and emotional symptoms are undeniably real, yet you weren't physically present during the unfortunate event. Nevertheless, you find yourself grappling with the aftermath of absorbing the traumatic tale, needing to navigate through it. It's natural to feel compassion and take on the suffering of others, but what happens when you've done everything you can to assist or are unable to help, and are left with a lingering sense of pain after emotionally immersing yourself in someone else's trauma? Many of us become disturbed upon hearing about others' pain, and our empathy and kindness come into play. Afterwards, it might seem like we have absorbed their suffering. We were fine before hearing their sad story, and suddenly we are traumatized, mirroring their experience. It's as if we've inherited their pain. The truth, however, is that once we experience an emotion, it becomes ours. The first step in managing it is acknowledging that it belongs to us. Otherwise, we treat it like an unwanted gift we wish to avoid. Unwrapping and accepting what we've internalized is essential. As a counselor, I became well acquainted with listening to traumatic stories. Some involved significant traumatic events, while others revolved around minor events that felt monumental to the individuals sharing them. I had to learn early on how to handle the suffering of others. Otherwise, I could have ended up overwhelmed rather than helpful. While I learned to establish boundaries and recognized the supportive role of empathy, I understood that distancing oneself too much impedes the flow of empathy. Hence, I taught myself to acknowledge and manage my own feelings. Initially, I explored the concept of the second arrow, rooted in Buddhism. According to Buddhist teachings, second arrows represent the pain we inflict on ourselves after the initial arrows of suffering are released. In the context of absorbing others' suffering, their pain is the first arrow, and the second arrow is the pain we unintentionally cause ourselves after learning about their suffering. To determine if the principle of the second arrow applied, scrutinize the process or mechanism behind your suffering after listening to trauma stories. Notice when your anxiety heightens. Is it while listening to a sorrowful tale, watching a traumatic movie, or pondering long after a friend shared an upsetting event? Second arrows can manifest in any of these situations and may also strike when recalling a distressing memory, as imagining it is akin to reliving the initial event. What narratives do you construct about the suffering of others? The experience of distress often arises from the stories we tell ourselves about what we hear or remember. Sometimes you might find yourself consciously engaged in these painful narratives, thinking along the lines of, "It hurts so much to go through that experience." In such cases, you might be recalling a similar personal incident. There are instances when disbelief may strike when confronted with others' suffering, especially if it involves unfamiliar events. Yet you can still experience empathetic distress. For instance, when someone shares breaking their leg after falling off a roof, you don't need to have undergone a similar accident to empathize. You understand their pain because you've encountered pain in your own life. The same holds true when hearing about a breakup. You can relate due to your own experiences with relationship challenges, rejection, loss, or other associated emotions. Your suffering serves as a signal from the psyche, alerting you to the possibility of encountering a potentially harmful situation, particularly in the context of listening to trauma, symbolized as a second arrow. Psychologist Mike Brooks, PhD, explains in Psychology Today that suffering motivates us to move away from things which can cause us harm, whereas pleasure and happiness help us move toward things that are good for us. He likens suffering to the aversion felt when consuming spoiled food, a natural response that aids survival. In the case of second arrows, your suffering is a healthy response to witnessing others' trauma. It helps you understand and empathize while also reminding you to avoid similar scenarios and not immerse yourself too deeply in their pain. Resisting what you hear and your distressing ruminations is ineffective. Instead, to alleviate your suffering, you can adopt a more accepting approach. Psychologist J.D. Kelly, as reported in the National Library of Medicine, suggests that once you consciously recognize negative emotions, you face a binary choice: resist or accept them. Accepting negative thoughts allows you to disarm them, while resisting only empowers them further. When you encounter information you dislike on a moral level, inner resistance arises. You build emotional walls against it, rejecting what is real. This resistance, combined with feelings of empathy, creates a potent mix of avoidance and emotions such as sadness and rage. By delving deeper, you discover that your resistance is directed towards your own emotions. When you fail to accept yourself in this way, you become stuck and unable to move forward. Realizing that to cope with your second arrows, you had to allow your emotions to flow and accept them rather than resist, was a crucial step. Embrace your emotions. Humanistic psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman, in his article for Scientific American, emphasizes the normalcy of your desire for acknowledgement of your suffering. He asserts, studies on patient and therapist testimonies highlight the significance of validating trauma for therapeutic recovery from trauma and victimization. For you, experiencing the aftermath of second arrows, it becomes crucial to acknowledge and recognize your own emotional journey. Rather than seeking external validation, it's essential for you to internally acknowledge and embrace your experiences instead of resisting them. The opportunity to move past a stagnant state arises when you cease the mental struggle to detach yourself from your suffering. During my counseling experiences, I encountered individuals trapped in a state of stagnation, unable to progress due to their unwillingness to accept their situations and emotions. There's a common misconception in the human psyche that accepting something unpleasant amplifies its power. Contrarily, resistance fuels the growth of painful emotions by demanding constant focus and energy. Acceptance, on the other hand, dissipates the accumulated suffering, preventing it from becoming an impending bubble waiting to burst. It's crucial for you to understand that acceptance doesn't imply agreement or a choice to like something. Deep down, there may be a belief that allowing feared emotions to flow equals surrendering freedom and succumbing to victimhood. However, in reality, resistance is the chain that binds, not acceptance. You discovered that allowing your feelings to naturally ebb and flow prevented their escalation and kept you from becoming entangled in stagnation. In the routine activities of everyday life, you might not always be a therapist or a client seeking therapy. Occasionally, you might be. However, more often than not, you encounter second arrows during your daily tasks. It's common for you not to pause and acknowledge your emotions in the midst of busyness, whether surrounded by others demanding attention or in moments of solitude, hesitant to confront challenging feelings. You make attempts to push these emotions aside, sometimes succeeding temporarily. However, they tend to resurface unless you actively address and navigate through them. Embrace your emotions fully. The most effective approach I've discovered to completely accept your emotions is to sit with them, offering them your undivided attention. You can do this promptly as they arise or at a later time. Your instinct is often to fix what you perceive as broken, including attempting to alleviate uncomfortable feelings. However, the goal isn't to change these emotions. It's to acknowledge and accept them. When you sit with an emotion, such as a second arrow manifesting as sadness, keenly observe its sensations in your mind and body. Inquire about its characteristics. Is it heavy and gooey or sharp and pointed? Contemplate the color that might represent the feeling and its location in your body. Reflect on its shape, size, texture, and whether it remains still or is in motion. Engaging in this exploration causes the intensity of the emotion to diminish and its dramatic impact lessens. Refrain from magnifying, adding to, or fearing it, allowing yourself to move through it with ease. By the time you've traversed it mentally, you've moved on. It's worth noting that before navigating through the emotion, you can sometimes engage in a bit of intellectual exploration, asking yourself what the emotion is attempting to reveal. It might be conveying crucial intuitive information, touching upon a personal experience that requires exploration, or indicating a sense of compassion and resonance with someone else's grief. At times, you may experience distress when you learn about the suffering of others. Their narratives may evoke your own painful experiences or trigger a desire to help. Once you acknowledge that your emotions, regardless of their nature, are not meant to harm you, but rather to assist you, you can accept them, delve into their depths, and move through them. Recognizing that grappling with painful emotions is unnecessary, and that the key to handling them effectively lies in non-resistance, you can extract valuable lessons from them, gaining wisdom in the process. Trusting yourself less often leads to clinging onto past emotions. Among these emotions, anger and resentment are frequently chosen to be held onto. It's a common phenomenon, particularly when coupled with forgiveness, which is often seen as mutually exclusive. In essence, the belief emerges that forgiving implies leaving the dynamics and situation unchanged, leading to a reluctance to forgive. Yet, there exists a method for you to establish boundaries with kindness and love for both yourself and others, even while extending forgiveness to them and the situation. This might sound somewhat idealistic, even overly simplistic, especially in the midst of anger and other challenging emotions. However, the act of holding on to these emotions is often not about the other person. Like any emotion, anger can pass through you if you permit yourself to feel the underlying pain. The longer you sustain the feeling of anger, the more it provides a sense of control. This, in turn, serves you by allowing the reinforcement of certain narratives in your mind, even if they are painful and detrimental to yourself. However, control is not its primary function. Anger serves you differently. It provides the power and energy to set boundaries. When not utilized for this purpose, typically due to fear and guilt, you begin to cling to it, using it as a protective mechanism. This protective mechanism shields you from the potential future hurt in the same manner. Fear is not wrong or invalid in this context, as without boundaries, feeling safe on the same terms becomes challenging. The drawback of this workaround is that you not only live with anger and resentment, but also with fear and an illusory sense of control. The term illusory is fitting because, in reality, resentment doesn't protect you in this scenario. Identifying deeply with the pain and continuously feeding it makes it challenging to see clearly, often leading to projecting this pain even into benign situations. You become defensive, constantly on guard, anticipating a threat approaching. In this way, anxiety itself cannot be simply healed with pharmaceuticals or positive affirmations. Consider this scenario. You're camping in the woods, surrounded by numerous mosquitoes at night. While these insects won't pose a life-threatening danger, they undoubtedly make your experience uncomfortable. The anticipation of their bites, which may manifest as fear or anxiety, is a genuine response, not a mere imagination. Now, you have various options for addressing this situation. You could take a calming medication, recite positive affirmations all night, but the most straightforward solution is to close your tent door. In this context, anxiety becomes irrational because the threat of mosquitoes is no longer real. The anxiety might persist for some time, especially if you've had prior experiences and your nervous system continues to respond on some level. In such cases, you might turn to various calming techniques. What often occurs is a focus on calming solutions when you're in situations where you avoid setting boundaries and closing necessary doors. You endure fear and anxiety, and instead of opting for practical solutions, you turn inward, blaming yourself for feeling this way. This self-denial unfortunately extends to therapists and an industry heavily reliant on medication. Regardless of how much medication you take, a sense of calm about the situation doesn't address the real issues in your life. Similarly, spiritual bypassing operates in the same way. You create overlays, things that momentarily help and calm you down, but don't address the actual situation at hand. Oftentimes, they even deny the reality of the situation altogether. A recent dream of mine illustrates this mosquito tent example vividly. In the dream, I was at a cottage, and there was a creature outside resembling a monster with big teeth. I knew it could potentially harm me. Instead of hiding or simply closing the door, I lay down on the bed and placed a cross made of jewelry on top of me, attempting to calm myself and maintain a spiritual attitude. Even in the dream, a part of me realized the absurdity and understood that the situation required something else, yet I persisted. The absurdity heightened as I found a piece of paper outside the door left by my mom. It was a medical note stating I had been vaccinated against something. I tried to place it at the doorstep, assuming the monster would read it and leave me alone. I grasped the impracticality of it all, attempting to solve a practical survival problem through intellectual and spiritual means. I refused to close the door or hide because it meant admitting fear, blocking it, and trying to escape through denying reality. Similarly, you resist fully feeling your anger as the energy that moves through you, to set a boundary and address something you're avoiding. Instead, you internalize it as stories in your mind, reminders of past pain. These stories continuously hurt you, seemingly shielding you from a similar fate in the future, but ultimately preventing you from moving on, harming both yourself and those around you. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means a lot. Thank you for joining us on this journey.